It's a pivotal time for ThesisGate. The University of London and the UK's Information Commissioner's Office dragged its feet with the tribunal court case to find out the identity of Tsai Ing-wen's external examiners. Both asked for a 2-day extension on their deadlines to submit their final representation pleas. However, 2 days have come and gone, and the ICO and the University of London have yet to submit their pleas. The tribunal court had no choice but to push back the court date until the end of August. This was an unexpected development for ThesisGate, but with so much already out in the open, Tsai and her people are out of options. They are working hard to stall legal proceedings. Currently, there are 3 ThesisGate-related Freedom of Information Act inquiries active in the UK. One is by American independent journalist Michael Richardson, who is directly petitioning the University of London for the identities of Tsai's examiners. The other 2 inquiries, however, scrutinize the university's rules and practices. This way, there are no private information restrictions that the defense can hide behind. Though it may seem a little excessive, the questions about the university are not only sharp, they also get around common defenses used by Tsai's people and the ICO. The ICO is going to have a hard time explaining the 2 examiner names brought forth by LSE legal representative Kevin Haynes. Files brought forth by Haynes claim that Tsai's examiners are Michael John Elliott and Leonard H. Lee. These 2 people could not have been Tsai Ing-wen's external examiners because, as explained before, they were university staff and therefore do not qualify as external examiners. The University of London knows this and knows it cannot support such a claim. The University of London says that it has records of Tsai's viva and that it also has records of her degree being conferred. However, the 278 pages of records Haynes pulled out on LSE's behalf shows, if anything, that there are records of Tsai out there. Whether or not they're authentic is another question entirely. The University of London is now in a difficult dilemma. If they come out and support the claim that Elliott and Lee were Tsai's examiners, then the school will draw scrutiny for improper and unethical academic operation. On the other hand, if they deny Haynes' claims, then that means LSE falsified information. It would be a catastrophe for Tsai. That's why the ICO and the University of London refused to submit a final representation plea. The ICO had already once rebuffed Richardson's request to reveal Tsai's examiners by insisting he had no right to invoke the UK Freedom of Information Act as an American. The courts already found that assumption to be wrong. Then they used Dr. Dennis Peng's indictment as another reason to not supply the requested information. These are inexplicable actions that reek of guilt. The ICO has forced the tribunal court to push back proceedings until the end of August. However, the cat is already out of the bag. Nothing can undo all of the telling evidence that has come to light over the past year and a half. The only recourse Tsai and her people have left is to force a win in Taiwan's courts. A win here would mean her fake degree would be validated, and the ICO and the University of London could then use that as their argument in the tribunal court. Use fake documents to win in Taiwan's courts. use that victory as a way to avoid divulging examiners. These are not willy-nilly predictions. On July 28th, the Taipei District Prosecutor will have a pretrial hearing for its defamation case against Dr. Dennis Peng, who is charged with defaming Tsai. The judge even wrote on the subpoena that they are likely to issue a decision after this hearing. The entire proceeding for this case has been suspicious from the start, not to mention that it violates human rights. Defendant Dr. Dennis Peng had raised many issues over the terms of the case, but he has yet to receive a single response. The judge simply rushes past procedures, almost as if they're trying to issue a decision before the UK tribunal court case. Dr. Peng's requests include 1. Having the Taipei District Prosecutor's Office explain why he received both an indictment and a non-indictment letter for the case. 2. Having the Taipei District Prosecutor's Office explain why his charge for breaching the Recall and Elections Act was dropped. 3. Having all non-Chinese evidence properly translated for consistency. 4. Asking Prosecutor Huang Wei to submit all relevant on-hand evidence into the case file. 5. Streaming court proceedings live to the internet due to pandemic restrictions and ThesisGate's broad appeal. None of Dr. Peng's requests received so much as a response or call to action. Prosecutor Huang Wei has in his hands over 200 pages of evidence, many of which contradict one another or flat out have not been verified by a relevant entity. Is the judge okay with this? Are they content with photocopies being submitted as evidence? Without so much as a hearing, Judge Zhang Yonghui dismissed Dr. Dennis Peng's suit alleging that Tsai's thesis didn't exist. Now that the High Court sent the case back to Zhang, Dr. Dennis Peng and lawyer Jim Chang are requesting that the judge recuse herself. Three months on, however, Judge Zhang has denied their request, despite the fact that she is being sued by Dr. Peng. Obviously, she doesn't see the flagrant conflict of interest. Even more outrageous is Judge Zhang rushing the proceedings in July at a time when Taiwan is struggling with a COVID-19 outbreak. What's the rush, Judge Zhang? Dr. Dennis Peng's case against Xavier Chang already saw Judge Zhou Yuxuan get switched out for Tsai Yuxuan. Tsai even summoned lawyers to prepare for trial. However, we exposed that both Tsai Yuxuan and Taipei District Court head Huang Guozong interfered in Zhou's decision-making and demanded answers from Judge Tsai. Before the judge had time to explain themselves, they were transferred away.
我立这个庭，第一件事情我要先问蔡宇轩，请问你是谁？请问你10月5号的时候在这个公文上你盖章是什么意思？你代表谁？他如果答不出这2个问题，我请他走，可以吗？
我没有意见，这是
可以哈。
你是当事人，
我当场叫他走
啊。你是当事人，
没关系，我当场叫他走。我就用这种方式来检验一下台湾的司法，没关系啊，你要把我扣起来就扣起来，没关系，反正我说过我是来写历史的。 对不对？我问他2个问题，请问你是谁？请问你在10月5号的时候用什么身份来介入我的这个案件的审判？这2个问题你合理回答，好，可以，你过关，你继续审判。如果这2个问题你答不出来，我请你向后转，自己找台阶下，你赶快走。
Who knew that before Tsai had a chance to answer, they'd run away? This manipulation in the courts is disgraceful. It is a shame to everything a justice system stands for. Someone is interfering in the courts to make sure Tsai gets her way. ThesisGate is a saga filled with oddities and unlikelihoods. It's a test of maturity for Taiwan's democracy. When we say oddities and unlikelihoods, we don't just mean politics. The general population seems to be willfully ignorant of ThesisGate. The media acts as if the investigation is some kind of circus. It's outrageous to think that an administrative court case is necessary to find out the identity of someone's external examiners. Not only that, but the court case constantly faces setbacks and delays. If anything, the unusual has become usual for ThesisGate. For one, all PhD theses need to be published and available upon their completion. This is the case at any respectable academic establishment. If a thesis needs to be kept private for business reasons, the longest a thesis's publication can be held back is 2 to 4 years. Tsai's thesis was withheld from the public for 35 years, and that's evidenced by the school's library admitting that they never received a copy. Tsai just says the school library lost her thesis. Public relations staff at LSE have already said that the school has no records of Tsai's PhD viva, and yet all of a sudden the school's legal department comes out with 278 pages? Furthermore, Tsai's viva evaluation does not have a date, nor does it contain the name of her examiners. Tsai's student record, however, still says she withdrew from her course. As if that weren't strange enough, take a look at this. According to LSE's legal team, Tsai's external examiners were Michael John Elliott and Leonard H. Lee. One was a public law lecturer, and the other was a criminal law professor. Their expertise had very little to do with Tsai Ing-wen's field of study, international trade. The icing on the cake is that both were LSE staff. According to the story so far, Tsai's viva took place on October 16, 1983, a Sunday, and was administered by 2 internal examiners. Can the school find a second instance of such events? All of this new information LSE provided was given through email. Is Taiwan's justice system so careless as to accept such flimsy and unreliable information? Tsai Ing-wen has provided 3 different titles for her thesis. The first one, referred to in her autobiography, is Unfair Trade Practices and Safeguards for Domestic Markets in a Changing World. The second title, Safeguarding Domestic Markets, surfaced in 2011 when Tsai made several university visits. The third and final title, Unfair Trade Practices and Safeguard Actions, came in 2019. First, all 3 titles are very broad in scope and are unsuitable for the meticulous research required by a PhD candidate. Next, what kind of PhD student would forget the title of their thesis? Even if someone forgot it, you'd think they'd get it right for their autobiography. Thesis titles and topics are things that can't be changed on a whim. Switching topics is a complicated and lengthy process. Digital information related to Tsai's thesis constantly changes as well. Her entry in the British Library had the date of award changed from 1983 to 1984. The dates in ProQuest database also bounce between 1984 and 1983. If Tsai's thesis really existed, would it be this hard to get the proper information keyed into library records? Another point of contention is Tsai's course completion date. There are 5 different dates between May 1983 and April 1984 recorded as Tsai's course completion date. Here's the thing. Dates on teaching position applications are not written several years after they're submitted. They're written in at the time the person is applying for the job. Could it be that Tsai immediately forgot her course completion date shortly after leaving London? June 1983 in particular is interesting because this date is at a time when Tsai hadn't even yet passed her viva. Of course, there's also the famous photograph that Tsai included in her autobiography, the one she claimed depicted her and her sister in London. That picture was the only one of Tsai's time in London she included in her book. However, a few ThesisGate sleuths uncovered that the picture was in fact taken in Boston, USA. Tsai even changed the picture's caption to reflect this discovery in the digital edition of her biography. In 2011, Tsai Ing-wen made a trip to Europe in preparation for an election. She went to LSE, not to visit her teachers or to see old classmates, but instead to meet with the head of the school and Professor David Held, the same man who played a role in Saif Gaddafi's academic scandal. It was likely that Tsai's team attempted to smuggle a thesis into the library, but it was intercepted by staff. Has there been any explanation for this 2011 occurrence from the school? If the school really lost Tsai's thesis, then when was Tsai notified? If the school really did lose Tsai's thesis, why would they reject one from Tsai? Tsai and the presidential office's reaction to thesis issues are abnormal to say the least. In 2019, Tsai Ing-wen faxed a thesis to LSE. The faxed thesis was missing 6 pages. Furthermore, the library placed absurd restrictions on public access to the thesis. Did a thesis with missing pages and whiteout marks really merit a no eating, no drinking, no photographing, and no note-taking policy? You couldn't even check the book out unless you had the author's consent. Tsai said she had nothing to do with these strict restrictions, but who else could have wanted such absurd rules in place? The University of London strictly prohibits photocopying its diplomas. Furthermore, graduates can only apply for replacements once. When applying for a replacement, a statutory declaration is required. Tsai Ing-wen, on the other hand, was able to get 3 different diplomas. 2 of the shown diplomas were photocopies. Tsai ran for New Taipei City Mayor in 2010, and when she registered, she submitted a photocopied diploma with a stamp that said it was the same as the original. When questioned about when exactly Tsai realized her diploma went missing, the presidential office had nothing nice to say.
我再多问一下哈，因为有些是时辰问清楚啊，比如说总统好像他的毕业证书是不见的。 但是物件的时间点到底是什么时候不见的？大概什么时候发现的？他什么时候？比如他之前报告说2010年有参选，2012年有参选，2016年参选，他的毕业证书那时候是用新的还是用旧的？
你似乎没有认真把刚刚的这个说明听完，等一下 PDF 电子档给你，你大概就会知道这个来龙去脉。
所以你能不能现在说明？
我刚刚已经说明了，我刚刚说明得很清楚。2010年他为了要参选。 当时跟学校申请的补发提供给中学会，这样是不是很清楚？那12年之后，但是不用，因为之前已经提交过了。
Tsai's arguments throughout her defamation case against Dr. Pang has been rather erratic as well. Tsai has all the relevant information in her possession, and yet she opted for public prosecution, which requires prosecutors to gather evidence and build their own case. Over the course of 500 days, Dr. Pang received both an indictment and non-indictment letter, the core arguments of both boiling down to, why shouldn't we believe Tsai Ing-wen? Would the prosecutors even try to find evidence contrary to Tsai's case? The entire process reeks of political manipulation. The oddities above were not the result of some sloppy political game, but rather manifested when lies fed into more lies, spinning a web of fabrications. The normal reaction for a legitimate PhD whose credentials come under question is to bring out as much evidence as possible, whether it's revealing external examiners or getting old instructors to vouch for them. It is not keeping information stashed away behind claims of privacy concerns and forcing skeptics to pry that information out through the courts. A legitimate PhD whose diploma comes under question would have no problem submitting their degree to authentication. They would not actively hinder efforts to verify their credentials. If you're a legitimate PhD, then when people question your education, you should be more than happy to provide proper documentation and records. It doesn't matter whose side you're on in ThesisGate, the time for a final showdown is nigh. Tsai will try to erase her academic dishonesty, and if we're going to stop her, now is the time. Tsai's defamation case against Dr. Pang is her final weapon in her fight to rid herself of the ThesisGate scandal. That's why she was forced to indict him. Prosecutor Huang Wei has more than 200 pages of evidence at his disposal, including letters between Tsai and LSE. These letters include explanations for things like why Tsai didn't have to pay tuition, why she could write her thesis in Taiwan, and how she could simultaneously be in Taiwan and London at the same time in 1983. Take, for example, this letter dated November 22nd, 1982. This explains why Tsai didn't need to pay tuition for that semester. But the inclusion of evidence accounting for such minor details tells a story all its own. If they can find details for such minor, inconsequential elements, then why couldn't they find more solid information on Tsai's examiners, her thesis, or her degree? Why spend over 500 days obsessing over such minutiae that can't prove anything definitively? Everything presented thus far has been the fabrication of national security organizations acting on behalf of Tsai to orchestrate the end of ThesisGate. Even if these documents lack any authentic signature, it's better than nothing. Tsai's army of netizens are already hard at work explaining why there are 3 versions of a Viva notification memo. They say the one without a signature is for LSE's records, and that for legal reasons, the school couldn't have it signed. Then the one from Soochow University had a signature because it was the original from 1984. This doesn't make any sense. Why would the school keep a memo without a signature? They're the issuing body, so they should take legal responsibility for the contents of the memo. How absurd is it that Soochow University possessed a more valid copy of the memo than the school that issued it to begin with? Then again, Tsai doesn't care about what makes sense as long as her hordes of netizens spread what she wants about her. To our viewers, we'd like to say, never fear. We have played these scenarios out several times. We may lose in Taiwan's courts, and we may even lose in the tribunal court. But should those events come to pass, we still have an ace up our sleeve. We are privy to information that can blow ThesisGate wide open. ThesisGate has become a struggle for honesty, truth, and justice, a battle between darkness and light. Tsai Ing-wen's fall from grace may be of no concern to ThesisGate collaborators abroad, but it will have steep implications for Taiwan. However, we cannot deny the damage the University of London has inflicted on the institution of higher learning.